Alrighty, well, welcome everyone again. Happy Saturday. We are glad that you are able to join us today. We have a great honor of having Bradley Chapman and Evelina Gromilina today. Bradley grew up in Tracy, California, and he's the only person in his family to pursue a career in medicine. Um, and he has prepared this session with Evelina um, to help answer some of the struggles and questions for the MCAT. Bradley started his education at San Joaquin Delta College and has worked full-time while balancing his coursework. He was at Delta for 3 years and transferred to UC Irvine and majored in a bachelor's in biology. I think it's your mascot Zot Zot, right? Or what is it?
Yeah,
The
yeah.
anteater. That's right. And he's begun his master's in biomedical sciences at the California University of Sciences and Medicine and hopes to start medical school this fall. Um, he has continued to work in healthcare as an EMT, first in Hayward, and now he is an emergency department technician in Orange, California. And he's developed a passion for mentorship, teaching, and in addition to his role as ER tech, he is a preceptor for EMT students who do their clinical rotations in the emergency department. Bradley took the MCAT 3 times and ultimately scored 92 percentile, 516, and he's going to talk about the lessons that he's learned for MCAT preparation and how to find success in your skills. And hopefully, you won't be taking it 3 times. Evelina Gromilina was born in Siberia, Russia, and immigrated to the U.S. at the age of 14. She attended U.S. high school. She started her education at Mission Community College while involved in student governance and finding passion in improving college experience with her peers. During that time, she participated in the Stanford Office of Diversity in Medical Education and Learning about addressing health disparities. Evelina transferred to UCLA, go Bruins, where she had an opportunity to engage in various research. After graduating, Evelina works full-time in research lab investigating voltage gauge sodium channels. She also mentors undergraduates, high schools, and she also mentors undergraduate high schools and PhD students who've joined her lab. Evelina studies for the MCAT and attempted taking it 3 times before scoring a score at a 99 percentile. And she hopes to share her insight and uh, valuable insight in her journey to the MCAT and share it with you today. So thank you. Um, and you can share the screen if you like. Yep. Awesome. All right, take it away.
Just getting my audio here. Okay, let's see. All right, we can see this, right?
Yep.
Okay, cool. So I'm gonna leave this up just for a couple seconds if anyone wants to take a photo of the QR code right there. Yeah, I just want to say thanks for hopping on and joining us. We're just gonna talk about basically like the lessons we learned, the tips that we want to share with you about MCAT prep today. So yeah, you can scan that QR code if you want, but it'll be at the end of the slideshow as well and kind of throughout. So in my first attempt at the MCAT, um, I scored a 501. And so I took it right after my senior year. Well, it was during my senior year at UC Irvine. And I was like, okay, I took all of the things that are relevant on the MCAT. I was a bio major. So I was like, okay, biology's on the MCAT. I can read, right? So cars won't be a problem, right? I had all of these incorrect thoughts. And so I took it. I didn't really study much. I took a couple practice questions. I was like, okay, this is probably fine. And I got the 501. I was like, okay. So then I decided I need to take this again to be a little bit more competitive for medical school. And so I studied intensively for 9 months. And so I had a full-time job. And I basically told them, hey, I need to cut my hours down. I went per diem, so I was doing like 1 day a month or 1 day a week. And for 9 months, I just studied really, really intensely, like 6 hours a day, more or less. And so then I bought the study course. I bought one of those like really expensive ones, had everything, right? And after 9 months of studying, I increased my score by like 2 points. So I went from 501 to 503. Um, and so, I thought I did everything right. Like my practice exam scores were going up, like it all looked like it was lining up well. But, I realized like I needed to do it again because, again, it's still kind of in that same range. And so then I ultimately took it one last time. It was like a month or so later. And then I got, over the 515, the 92nd percentile for the MCAT. And then I realized that, test anxiety really just had the best of me on my second attempt. And so I realized that I would be able to overcome this if I just basically fixed the mindset of, when I entered the exam.
Yeah, so I think the mindset is very important and was one of my struggles when I was taking the MCAT because you really need to believe that you can do better and that you're capable of putting more effort and more importantly, the right kind of effort, and that way you would improve. I feel like on my first attempt, I also felt like, oh, it's just like all the tests I take in the school and it will be similar that I already know like all the prerequisites and things like that. So I felt like coming in I knew enough and then did not like put in the sufficient effort. And then my second attempt I also actually did put in so much more effort and then I didn't score better, which was a lot more hurtful after all that effort. But really, um, the third time when I finally got it, it was really seeing what I wasn't doing right and fixing it and like being honest with me, like it's possible to be able to do better, and I just need to find how. Another thing I wanted to mention is that the you have to get in the mindset of the MCAT being important because there's a lot of thought of like, oh, the MCAT is just to weed people out, and the MCAT doesn't like really represent what you're gonna need to know as a doctor. But I think for me, it was helpful to engage with the material from the standpoint of how would it be helpful to me in the future, and that was a lot more motivating for me. For example, like the fluid dynamics and physics feels like something that you wouldn't need as a doctor. But if you're a pulmonologist, you would need to understand how the physics of the airflow works in order to understand the different mechanics and different like pros and cons of each ventilation method. So I think for me, it was helpful to look at the material that I felt like, oh, I don't feel motivated to learn it, but to look at it from the side of what would it be useful for if I for me for being a doctor for my future, because at the end of the day none of us are taking the MCAT just to take the MCAT. We're taking the MCAT because we want to be a doctor, and I feel like that's kind of mindset helps to be more engaged with the material.
Absolutely. Yeah, kind of just echoing that, right? It's all about, you got to remember your why. Like, why are you doing this? Why put yourself through all these hours of studying, right? And so, kind of from going at the top from left to right. So there's me and a group of my colleagues. We're in Tijuana and we're helping out at a free clinic. And that's important to me because I didn't really have access to healthcare in the area that I grew up. And so I wanted to be able to, once I got experience in the medical field, I wanted to be able to help out the populations who are also struggling with access. And then, on the other photos there, you can see, they're doing like this really cool procedure, right? And so they're in the field that they love. And then, for me, I work in the ER as an ER technician, and so like for me, I really love working with the patients there and seeing all of the different things and learning in the ER. And so, being within the field, however you can be really, really motivating. And whether you're in the field or not, there's some shows down there like on days that I felt really, really unmotivated, I just throw on like Scrubs or ER or now The Pit, which is new. really, really recommend that. It's a great new ER show, but and then everyone knows Grey's Anatomy, so that can be really motivating if you like can't get in the hospital or if you just need like to just kind of sit back and take it easy. So we're going to talk about the timeline. And so I had a lot of questions about, when do I need to take the exam, right? Like when do I need to start preparing? How does it align with, primary applications and all that stuff? So um, basically, you're going to take the MCAT right here where it says take the MCAT. This is all general advice, right? You don't have to do it exactly this way. There are some hard deadlines, like when you need to submit your primaries, when you need to, complete the secondaries, the interviews, yada, yada. But basically, January through May is like the most average time for people to take the MCAT. Right now, we're in February, right? 2025. So if you were to take the MCAT, you probably would have been wanting to prepare like these months prior. And so then I'd be looking at maybe 2026, like if you haven't prepared at all, right? And so you can even be starting now, right? And then have any MCAT date that you want. You can even take it here where it says, and then you can, submit your primaries like in like the following May, right? But if you've been preparing and you feel like, hey, I'm pretty close to the score I want, I just need a little bit more help, then hopefully we can help you, and then maybe you'll be able to take the MCAT, coming up. So this is the fee assistance program. Basically, if you have a certain income, the AAMC will help you out with certain fees. So like taking the MCAT itself. So I think they'll give you like half off if I'm not mistaken. And then a lot of their like the bundle is I think for me it was free. So it's like the MCAT prep bundle, which we'll talk about in a little bit. But yeah, highly, highly recommend. The two QR codes right there are to actually register for the exam. There's like certain dates that they open up the spots, right? And then everyone kind of floods in, and then you can take your spot basically. I think when I was uh, doing that whole process, I was like, I was there the moment it opened, and I was like number 2000 in line. And so it is like, it's competitive to just like get the MCAT date registered. So I would do that, be aware of those dates. But that being said, it doesn't mean that you can't get one. It just might be a little bit harder. Um, and then the other QR code is the fee assistance program waiver, which if you qualify, I would highly recommend doing that. So a lot of people, and myself included, had questions about like, how do I know what resources to use? How do I know what content and questions like to even to even look for, right? And so here are some examples. So we have different MCAT prep options. There's study programs, there's question banks, and there's like the free ones. And the free ones have paid upgrades. But basically you have like these big bundle companies, right? And so like Blueprint, for example, um, they have practice questions, they have live exams, live instructors, video modules, right? You have all these things to learn from, but at the bottom you can see it's like $1,500 to $4,000. And so some of them will honor the fee assistance waiver. So if you have that, some of them will say, hey, we'll give you whatever percentage off. So that could be pretty helpful. But again, that is really expensive. So you can look at question banks. And so question banks are around $300. I put the little crown on the AAMC because you really want the AAMC. Like if you can't get anything else, make sure you have that one because those are the people who make the MCAT, right? And so you want to have that one at least. If you can get the other ones, I would. UWorld is great. A lot of people love UWorld. And then on the far right, you have Khan Academy, Jack Weston, and then that star is Anki. And so Khan Academy is a list of video modules that basically cover what's on the MCAT. And it's super helpful. They're free. And you can actually access them through the AAMC. So they have like a list of all the different Khan Academy things that you need to do. And then as for Jack Weston, there's a lot of free practice questions. And then the Anki is like a space repetition flashcard app. Basically, I would just look into it. It kind of a lot to explain on that one, but I find it super, super helpful, and I wish I found it earlier. So this is an example of how to put two of those resources I just mentioned together. So what I have here on the left is the AAMC official prep bundle. And so that is a list of like few thousand questions, some full length exams. So it's like the full 7 hours, like all of those things to help you prepare. And so then you can buy that bundle. And again, if you have the fee assistance waiver, make sure that you get it because that'll cut down that price a lot. For the video modules, right, to like actually learn the content, not just practice the questions. The AAMC, if you go to it, you can look at what's on the MCAT exam content outline course. And basically that will give you the list of Khan Academy video modules. So you can just combine those two, and that can be all of your prep, right? Um, More the better, obviously. Um, but yeah, this is just one example. And now Evelina will talk about how she put hers together.
I just wanted to add that we have a whole session that we've done on how to use Anki for your classes and also for the MCAT. So
Oh,
we
awesome.
put the link in the.
Yeah, that's great.
So, I just want to preface it by saying that you can do well on the MCAT with any set of resources as long as you do have the AAMC. You have to have the AAMC. But otherwise, all the third-party things, they don't matter as much. You could get an amazing score with all the free things, but these are just the suggestions of like what I used and what I would recommend for people to use. So I really liked Jack Weston. They have a lot of very quality free stuff, especially their um, Jack Weston podcast. When I was working full time and then studying for the MCAT, it was really helpful for me to listen it on my commute because I would kind of get from the mindset of work into the mindset of like I have to study for the MCAT. And overall, it was very encouraging and helpful. They also have um, a lot of questions and like right now also full length exams that are free. And it's nice to be able to use those questions before you move on to the EMC because you can filter for specific content that you're trying to test yourself on. They also give me a FAB discount if you're eligible for fee assistance program. A lot of the third party uh, programs will give you a discount. You just have to ask for it. So make sure you do that if you are trying to buy something. Um, then there's Khan Academy that I also used for videos after I was missing questions on certain content in order to fill in the gaps. Khan Academy follows the outline that the EEMC provides of like all the content that you need to know. And that's also available in order to see like which things the EEMC specifically tells you you have to know for the exam. Then for cars, I would recommend being really picky with what you use for your cars practice because cars is testing logic and the logic have to align with what EEMC thinks is a logical thing to do, not what Kaplan thinks is a logical thing to do. So for cars, I would use the testing solutions guide on SDN, which is completely free, and I think it aligns most with my personal cars philosophy. And I would use, I think Princeton Review gets pretty close to EEMC, but EEMC does have a lot of question banks for cars, so make sure you're able to have time in your schedule to finish all of the EEMC because that's the thing that's actually indicative of how the real cars is going to be like. And then for MCAT math, I would watch Leah Forsyth videos, and she also has guides and stuff to improve your math skill, which is also free.
Yeah, I so for me, I used the Blueprint. I got like their big bundle thing that they had, like their whole program. And so I watched all the video modules. I did a lot of their practice questions, and then I think they give you like four full-length exams. It's either like four or seven. I did four of them from them, and then I did for the AAMC, I did every practice question. I made sure that each one was checked off. And then I took all four of their four full-length exams before I took the actual MCAT. And then for Jack Weston, I really, really like their podcast. It's really cool. Like Phil and Azai were just like such a light, in a hard time, just trying to get through all the MCAT material, and they just made it so fun. And it was really cool to just see people just having a conversation about MCAT material in a way that was really engaging. And so I would highly, highly recommend their Spotify podcast. It's free. And yeah. So for me, the cars questions I actually found helpful. I would agree with Evelina that the AAMC, their cars are going to be the gold standard. If you need a little extra practice, like for me, when I first started with cars, I was scoring in like the 30th percentile or lower. And so I needed a lot of help. So I was just kind of going through those cards questions from Jack Weston. And then once I got a little bit better at it, then I fully shifted to AAMC. But I do like them. And then they also have a Chrome extension. So the AAMC will, when you go through their questions, they'll basically give you an explanation for why the answer is the answer. And the Jack Weston Chrome extension actually kind of adds on to that. And so you get a little bit more for the explanation, which I found super helpful. So we're going to talk about planning for success now.
So a lot of times people ask like how long will it take me because you have to schedule it and people want to have a plan. And I think the way that I would find to think most helpful about it is that you have content and you have practice. You always have to do some of each. You never do just one or the other because when you're studying content, you have to test yourself in order to see whether your studying is actually helping you answer a question correctly and whether you're studying correctly. And then when you practice, you will still have to go back to content when you're missing things, either because you forgot or missed something because the MCAT is so broad. So you're never going to run out of content. And the way I would think about it is that you start with like a lot, mainly content, and you do a little bit of practice in order to test what you just learned, but you're mostly studying. And then naturally over time, you're going to run out of content and you're gonna start doing a lot more practice, but you're still gonna be coming back to your um content in order to fill in the gaps. And that's kind of how I would know that you're ready to actually take the test. Because if you are still having to go back for large amounts of content and you don't have that much practice, then you're probably not ready. You're not done with all the content. And also, you need to have this period of a lot of practice in order to understand how the test works because the MCAT isn't just knowing the things, it's also being able to think the critical thinking part, the logic of the MCAT. And you cannot do that without doing a lot of practice. Which is on the right, I'm showing the graph of like you sometimes you hear I only studied 3 weeks for the MCAT and I got like a 90th percentile. And it's probably because they started out knowing a lot of content. They have photographic memory or something from their prerequisites, and therefore their content stage, like very quickly, just became practice stage. But you cannot skip the practice because the MCAT is about how you study for the MCAT. But
I would just add that anybody that says, "Oh, I just took studied for 3 weeks," they're the outlier. They're not like that. They're not the norm. So if anybody ever tells you that, I said, "Well, I could do it too." It's like, well, you should probably know yourself a little bit better if you could do it or not. But
Yeah,
that's the outlier.
I fell into that
Um,
trap too.
and I
Absolutely.
think everybody's always looks out for that outlier as well. They did it in 3 weeks, and then
Yep.
you end up saying you just got to start saying, you know what, I don't have that ability, or and there's people that have the ability to do it, and if you're one of those people, God bless you. But I'm
Yeah.
just saying, for the normal living humans, it's not possible. So
Yeah.
yeah, I think my main point is that you have to be self-aware because if you've planned, I'll be studying for 3 months or 4 months, and you're still not at the stage where you had sufficient content, sufficient practice in order to be in that practice, like at the end, you're mainly practicing and you're making like little adjustments, and that's when you are ready to take it. So you have to know that where you're at in this process in order to know whether you're actually ready, because nobody else can tell you that it would take you 3 months or 6 months. It's only you could actually really know that.
Yeah. It's also basically when you hear someone say, "Oh, I studied for like 2 months," right? Maybe their 2 months, they don't have anything else that they're balancing. right? Like maybe they can just sit there for 10 hours and study and like honestly, like more power to them. That's amazing. But not everyone can do that. Like, some people have full-time jobs they have to balance, right? And so then your 2 months, if you have a full-time job, like that's going to be split between working and studying, right? And so just keep that in mind when you hear these numbers thrown around. So I found a calendar to be super helpful. So this is the Blueprints MCAT calendar. It's free. And like I said, all of these different resources are going to be in that QR code, which we had at the beginning and at the end. But basically the calendar is super helpful because you can pretty much plan out your week or a couple weeks, months, right? And you can say, okay, I'm going to get these things done. And I find the calendar helpful because you can move it around. Not every day is going to be perfect. You're going to have some days where you can get a lot done, some days where you can't, right? Life happens. I mean, you can have the most planned out, structured calendar, but at the end of the day, things can change. And so that's why I like this one a lot because it's not like at 8 a.m. I have to do this or, my whole schedule falls apart. It's like, no, it's just get it done in the day. And if you can do it, great. If not, you just can drag and drop it to the next day. And so I found that super helpful. I'd highly recommend getting a calendar. I did like the Blueprint one, but really you can use any calendar.
So, I used like a time tracker that I think people use like when they're doing freelance work. So I would only like start it when I'm actually studying and stop it and any breaks and things like that. And this is like one of the screenshots of like, oh, was like my really good week of like I studied like every time after work and I also studied like full weekends. And then some weeks, like I was just way too tired after work, and I'd only be studying some on the weekends. Or some weeks I didn't really study at all because I think something that's really important is to know whether you're in the space to study because you can spend like a lot of hours, but if you're too burnt out, you're just getting more burnt out. I think there's the questions in the Q&A of whether you burned out whether while studying for the MCAT and what we did to prevent or cope with the burnout. So I do think MCAT, especially if you have a lot of other responsibilities like work and things like that, can be really hard. Um, and I think one thing is to know that it's okay to stop and like not beat yourself up for it and just like take a break. And then once you're fully rested, you will learn better. And that's just part of the studying. You can't, like, your schedule cannot be so packed that you cannot take like a week off, and come back to it. I think another thing is something we touched on in the beginning, like um the motivation and keeping like coming back to why it's important. I actually kept volunteering even though it was like once a week, in order to feel like, oh, this is why I'm doing all of that and doing all the studying. This is why this is important, and kind of going back to um why am I doing this? And that's really motivating and helpful to not burn out as bad. So another thing is so you have your books, your materials, your everything. So how do you like actually do study on the daily basis? And the way that I would think about it is there's a cycle. You start with your practice. Like for example, you just took a full length exam. You have to review it pretty much immediately so you know what you were thinking when you were doing the questions. And you have to analyze what I did versus what I was supposed to do, even for the questions that you got right. And then you study based on that. You missed like certain content, or you don't have certain skills, or things like that, and you have to go back and study. However, you have to reflect on whether you've studied this before and you still missed it, and what should you be doing differently in order to this time when you study, you don't just do the same thing, you do something different in order to make the different outcome next time. And then you go back to practicing what you just studied in order to check whether you studied correctly. And then you just keep going in the cycle of practicing, reviewing, studying.
Yeah, absolutely. And this is kind of just like a example of how to do that, right? And so ABCs of MCAT prep. And so as you can see, so for the A, right, you have about an hour. And so you can spend time watching video modules on amino acids, for example, right? It could be anything. And then you do like 10 to 20 practice questions on that same thing that you just watched, right? And a lot of people make the mistake of thinking like I have to only do content and then I can practice after I've looked at everything on the MCAT. But if you do it that way, by the time you finish everything, you're gonna forget the content that you saw like way at the beginning, right? And so you won't really have the opportunity to refine that knowledge. And so you want to do it like right after. So that's why it's important to just get the modules done, right? It could be video modules if you're, a book person, read the book, right? And then do the practice questions right after. You also want to review your mistakes, right? And so that's what Evelina was just saying, where it's important to adjust, right? And so you want to take notes, see why did I get this wrong? What can I do the next time? And we'll give you an example of what that looks like after the slide. And so for B, right, you can do it, 2 hours, you can do it more, right? If you have like 8 hours in the day, then, you could just keep doing B, right? B, go back to A, right? And then at the very end of the day, once you're like, okay, I've seen all the video modules, done everything I want to do, you can do your Anki flashcards. I found Anki to be super helpful. And then like Jubin said, right, you can look at their video on how to do Anki, which I really, really recommend. And then you can see at the right, that's like an example of a flashcard from Anki, right? I can succeed on the MCAT. True. So what does review look like? So if you have an incorrect passage-based question, and we'll kind of talk more about what the passage versus discrete questions look like. Passage-based, kind of as it implies, there's a lot of writing, right? And so you kind of have to synthesize the information. There could be figures, there could be all these different things. And so maybe you had like a math error, right? Maybe there's like a figure you didn't really get, or there was an equation you needed to know, right? There's a lot that can kind of go wrong. And so you need to figure out the exact problem. For the discrete question, it's usually just like a one line, couple line thing, and it'll say, what is this enzyme's like function, right? And you either know it or you don't, in most cases. And so, it often indicates a content gap if you didn't get that right. And so, I would just say make a flashcard on it, put it in your rotation, check it out again. Down here, I have an example. So this is from Blueprint. As you can see, this person's really strong in cars. It's at the very bottom. They got like 84% of them correct, but they need a lot of help with their physics, right? Physics like 40% correct versus 60% wrong. And so, if I were this person, I would say, okay, my cars is pretty good. I would spend a little bit more time on the physics, right? Because each part of the MCAT's worth the same, right? It's like it's a quarter, 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 quarter. And so, it's not like one section's worth more. So they're equally important. And so I would be recommending to this person, like, hey, get your, physics a little bit better in your OChem.
So this is the way I reviewed my WAMC content questions practice. And I only did it for WAMC because I think you really need to get into the head of the test writers and not really into every third party person who write the question. So the way that I went over it, I did it almost immediately, either the same day or the very next day after the practice of whether AAMC full length or AAMC practice questions, and in order to remember what exactly I did, and I would choose which things I got wrong. I also look for things that I flagged and things that I went over time on. Like if I spend too long, that means that I might not have enough time for another question, and that means I should be doing something different, even if I got it correctly. So, and then I would go over um each single question, even if I got it correct. And I would see whether my thoughts were aligned with the AAMC thoughts. And I would conclude of like what it was that really made me miss that question. Was it that I didn't just know something in the content? Did I not see what I was supposed to understand in the passage in order to answer this question? Did I did I didn't like put something together or had like a different thought, or maybe I spent way too long on math because I wasn't estimating. And then I would decide what I would need to do in order to fix that in the next time I practice. And based on that, I would see which topics I missed like the most on, and I would start from that and study that, then do practice specifically on that content and review and like the cycle all over again. And I usually spread uh my tests, full length test, at least like 2 weeks from each other, because I had other things to do. And also I wouldn't take the next test until I was confident that I did like the majority of the things to fix my first test.
Yeah, so we'll kind of talk a little bit more about like the full length, and then we'll go into like the MCAT section specifically. And so for the full length exam, so these are just some tips. They're general tips. I mean, they're not going to apply to everyone. This is what I use, what I believe Evelina used for the most part. And so um, the one thing that I notice a lot of people do is they don't take their full length practice exam. They don't do it until like way later, because they're nervous about taking it or they feel like they're not ready. And honestly, that's kind of the point, right? You want to take it just early on, maybe within the first couple weeks of actually studying, because you want to basically like rip the band-aid off and just kind of get it out the way and say, okay, I know what the exam is looking like, what to expect on it, and then you can kind of begin the refining process of that whole, flow chart that we had. And so I highly recommend taking one early on, and then like Evelina said, right, about every 2 weeks or so, make sure that you're doing a full length. And so a lot of people say, maybe go for 5 or so full length exams before test day. I like 7. A lot of people I've talked with also say 7, so maybe try to complete something around there before your actual exam. Also, fully review your full length within 3 days. 2 is better. If you can't get to it, things happen. It's okay, 3 days. But if you wait too long, like let's say you wait like a week and a half after you've seen your full length, it's going to be hard to remember what you were thinking in that moment when you got the question wrong. And then it's hard to refine from there. And so that's why we say like 2 days, 2 to 3 days is really good. Don't review it the same day, right? If you just did a full length, you spent like 7 hours, with MCAT material, go outside, like go do anything else. I would not say review on the same day. You'll probably be fried. I would be fried. And then when you're doing your full lengths, you want to be mimicking your test day conditions. So on the test day, you can't have your phone, you can't have, anything else. Like it's going to be distraction free. You just want to have your snacks, lunch, water, etc., right? Anything that you might need for being somewhere for 7 hours. And then I would say use each break fully. Part of me, I wanted to just get it over with, right? Like just like skip the lunch, skip the break, right? Just get to it. But your brain needs that time to kind of rest and then regenerate, its energy basically. At least I did, and I would recommend that others do that as well. And then also for the last thing, it's kind of minor, but I think it's important. Go to a couple new places, because if you're going to the same spot every time, and you do it for like 7 different, attempts for your full lengths, and then you go to somewhere new, it might throw you off just a little bit and then add to your anxiety. So I did like a couple libraries. I think I did like some other study spot when I was taking my full length. So I think that's really important. Um, Over here is just some reasons why. And so like I mentioned, right, you're going to reduce your anxiety when you're doing your full lengths. You're going to build your stamina, because if you are just practicing normally, you basically you're taking a couple chunks at a time, right? It's different from doing 1 hour than like a 7 hours, right? Straight. And so you're gonna see like stamina is actually like a skill. Like it's something that you can build, and it didn't really seem like something that you could get better at. But it is something that I can personally tell you like I got better at over time. And so that's gonna be super helpful. So these are some question types. You have discrete and you have passage based. So as you can see, right, the passage based has a passage associated with it. So it'll give you figures, it'll give you like a lot of, paragraphs of information. You have to basically synthesize it and then figure out, okay, what does the question want me to know? Or what do I have to like know about this to answer the question? And as for the discretes, right, it's like a one-liner. It's basically like, do you know this or not, right? And so they're going to require different tools, kind of as we talked about before.
So another thing is the pseudo-discrete and combination. The pseudo-discrete is a name for the question where you have it on a passage, but really you don't need to know anything from the passage in order to answer the question. And then like the combination question is the one that I think is the hardest on the MCAT because it's the kind of question that requires you to have some outside information, but you need to either alternate or build on it based on what you were told in the passage, which might be different from what you know. And then based on that, you have to answer the question. And I think there's a lot of like people either want to answer every single question out of their head or they want to answer every single question out of the passage. And that leads to you either missing things that were in the passage or missing things that you were supposed to know and wasting time looking for things. But I think one of the other ways to know that you're ready to take the actual test is that when you look at the MCAT question, you should be able to tell should I have known that, or should I have seen that in a passage, or both? And even though it feels like the MCAT tests everything, there are borders. And once you get to the point where you know most of the content, you will start feeling those borders. Like, oh, this passage is asking me the difference between different strains of HIV, but I don't need to know that anything about those like specific strains of HIV that's in the passage. But I do need to know that it's a retrovirus and like things about the viruses and things like that. And being able to know that is going to save you a lot of time on the test because you will know where to look or where to think of in order to answer each question.
Yeah, I 100% agree with that. I mean, there it feels like there's no way that you can ever learn everything that you have to know about the MCAT. And to say everything is probably not, right? But you have a really good idea of what you actually need to know and like what you probably don't. Just like Evelina said, if you have this hyper specific enzyme or like, I don't know, maybe like some kind of mechanism, right? It's like don't start to gaslight yourself and be like, oh my gosh, I should have known this. Why didn't I study, this like super specific enzyme? Like, don't do that. If you studied hard, you basically get the feel for what's actually MCAT and what's not. So yeah, I 100% agree with that. So this is chemistry and physics. So you can see, right, you got sodium, you got chloride, put them together, and it's like, oh, it's just kind of table salt, right? It's like whatever. So then we're going to talk about basically tips for each section.
So, chemistry and physics was my worst section when I started. I think I was really intimidated, especially by the math, like the mental math. Like, I can do it, but I cannot do it fast enough for the MCAT. And you have to really estimate because the MCAT doesn't I think one of the things that I started realizing once I was doing a lot of WSC practice is that they don't ask you really, really difficult questions that are math related. They just look intimidating. And then you just need to simplify it, and the answers are far enough from each other that estimation is usually enough. So don't let that one like math question take your like 5, 10 minutes and then you don't have enough time for like the last passage or two because each question is worth just as many points. If you aren't able to do the math, you can move on and do other questions. But really, in order to do well on Chem Phys, you have to really know your equations and be able to apply them. So the MCAT is not always going to ask you just plug and chug the numbers into the equation that you know. A lot of times they'll ask you, how does this happen when this happens? And you have to remember that these things are related through the equation and remember how one thing would affect the other in order to explain it in words, not like in math. Another thing is the units. The units are really helpful on the MCAT because everything is given to you with some kind of units, and that's kind of your double check of whether your units have created the answer that you're looking for.
Yeah, absolutely. And so we'll go over an example kind of. And so you can see right here at the very bottom, there's that equation right there, like the Q equals pi r to the fourth power, all that. And so, this can be like really intimidating, right? Like for me, I was never good at math. I was always really, really bad at math, actually. And it can be intimidating to see, like all of this passage info, and then you have to know these equations and all this. But like Evelina just said, it's really just sometimes they'll say what happens to, so Q is flow rate, right? And so they're like, okay, if we have this tube and you double the radius, what happens to the flow rate, right? And so like it'll give you all of this passage information, all of these like equations, these charts and everything, but really it comes down to just, okay, we double the radius, what happens to the flow rate, right? And so then like based on the equation, it's just 16x, right? And so that's really what it comes down to a lot of times. So if you know these you really well, you can kind of just see, okay, manipulating this variable does what to the overall value, right? And then you can just move on from there. And it's really not that bad, but it's just getting there and developing that skill of being able to pick out what they're actually trying to ask you is the part that takes time. So we got critical analysis and reasoning, cars. Some people hate it, some people love it. I was definitely on the not a Cars fan train. So
So cars, I think is a very um unique section comparison to the other ones. You can't study for it, which can be kind of intimidating because there's no oh, you just learn the set of things and you will do better. You have to really practice it. As soon as you start studying for the MCAT, you have to do practice because there's not really like studying. I would really recommend the testing solution guide. It's free and you need to really clear your mind. There's no outside information. In fact, I think the MCAT sometimes does this thing where they make a passage about something that a lot of pre-meds would know something about, like public health or things like that. And then you have to ignore everything you know about that subject beforehand. The only thing that matters is what the author said and how they said it. Because there will be an answer choice that matches like the majority opinion or something that you could have thought. And really, it only matters what the author had thought. And I think for me, after each passage, I would take like 3 seconds to just like breathe, clear my mind, forget what happened on the previous passage, and focus on this passage. I think a lot of companies will have you do some kind of like note-taking, like system, like they would have like charts and whatnot. I think Princeton Review makes you like read all the beginnings of all the passages and then like rank them and like and you don't have time for that. Really, the cars on the MCAT, you have the exact time to just read the passage, answer the question, read the passage, answer the questions. You do not have the any time to like do anything extra. So I was really strict with my timing for cars specifically. I think on the sciences I was more lax because some things would take me less and some things would take me more. For cars, I would really make sure that I only spend the amount of minutes that I'm supposed to spend on that passage. And even if I'm not done, I will move on because you're risking not getting to the last passage and losing all of the points on there. Another thing is you need to prioritize the WMC resources because you need to understand their logic of how cars works. And you have to practice intentionally. Don't like read the answers and be like, well, I should have known that, and then do another passage. I think what I started doing towards the end that I felt was helpful is that I would do my practice passage and then I would see which questions I got wrong without looking at the answers. And then I would do it again without the time restraint, without anything. And I would see if the second time I would get the right answer because that helped me really uncover the thought process that I was supposed to use in order to answer that question. And again, timing. Timing is the most important thing on cars because you can lose a lot of points if you get stuck on a certain passage.
Yeah, absolutely agree. Certain techniques will work well for different people. Some people they like to maybe decide like which one seems the hardest for them and then go from there. I mean, if it works for you, great. I mean, for me, it didn't. I would say just go in order. And pretty much another thing is use your highlighter. Like each character costs money. Don't over highlight. I think that's really important because I would fall into this trap where I'm like, oh, this seems important, the next line, oh, this seems important. And then, at the end, everything's highlighted and then I accomplish nothing. So be sparing with your highlighting. I think that's also super important. So these are some cars tips. There's just like four kind of main idea points, but so some things that you can look for are transition words, right? And so nevertheless, despite, however, right? These things are kind of setting up an opposing view. And so a lot of times the question that they ask you will be based on something that, comes from one of these transition words. So like the author will give an opinion on this, right? And then they'll be like, however, new evidence suggests blah, blah, blah. And then it'll ask you, something along the lines of what happened right there. That's pretty important. The opposing views, right? Some believe this, or many people say, blah, blah, blah. And so it's kind of a way to set up the sentence in a way that's saying, I'm going to refute whatever is just being said right now. And so it kind of primes like your piques your interest, right? It's like, okay, this person's starting the sentence this way, so they're probably going to refute it, later on. Also, why, right? And so what is the author trying to accomplish by writing this paper, right? They don't actually just write Cars passages to be as boring as possible. Right. I mean, some people really enjoyed some of the Cars passages. I found some pretty interesting, but there were others that I just like really did not care about. Right. So it's like, why are they writing it? Are they just venting their frustrations? Right. Are they mad about something? Do they just want to tell you how much they love a piece of art? Do they just want you to know about something? Right. Just bring attention to it. Are they trying to persuade you? Right. Just think about the purpose of it. And oftentimes the AAMC will ask you, why did they write it in one way or another, they'll be asking you like the purpose about it. Um, some things to be careful about. Answers that say always, never, often, mostly, right? Things that are like strongly worded, especially always and never. It doesn't mean that they won't be the right answer. It just means that you need to be kind of cautious because always means always, like every single occasion, every possibility, it's always, right? And so if the author says something directly like that, then you can pick the answer. If they don't, I would stay away from it unless none of the answers make sense, then maybe. But just kind of be careful with those. And again, it doesn't mean that it'll never be that. Um, and so the last one is engage, right? And so, like I said, some of them were pretty boring for me. But instead of saying like, man, this is so boring, like who cares about this statue, right? Like this, I don't care about it. Change it into you're looking now for like these transition words. You're looking for nevertheless, despite, however, you're looking for the reason they wrote it, right? And so now you're kind of putting yourself like in this detective mindset. So it's actually you're kind of gamifying it instead of like trying to just get through a passage. So I found that to be really fun and it made cars a lot more enjoyable for me.
Yeah, I think another mindset on cars is that help me be engaged is also connecting it to medicine. I think someone on Jack Weston said it's like your first patient because you would have to meet a lot of people who you don't understand or who are interested in things that you might not find it interesting, but you should be able to listen to them and really understand what they're saying. And that's one thing that I was thinking, like if you're reading a weird like art passage, maybe your patient is telling you about their like grandchild's like art course or something, and like you have to really be able to engage with what they're saying and listen actively.
Yeah, some people like they'll present information about themselves, like maybe a patient, right? Like maybe you ask them a question and then they'll talk about something and you're not really sure like what they're getting at, right? And so um, these skills actually do translate in a way to medicine where you can kind of get better at understanding like what they're telling you. And so yeah, it is helpful, and I would agree with Jack Weston and Evelina on that. So here's the biochem section. This was my favorite section. It's a lot of people's favorite section just because it feels in a lot of cases like the most relevant to medicine. And then you can see our meme right there. So here's like quote unquote high yield topics. Some people you ask like, what is high yield on the MCAT? They'll tell you everything's high yield, right? Because everything matters. But then realistically, right? So there's what when I say high yield, I think of what occurs and shows up most often on the MCAT. Amino acids, for example, is one. I would know basically the general structure of them, like their properties, like what basically category they belong in, right? And so this is from Jack Weston. Again, we're big fans of Jack Weston just because they have a lot of free resources. They're super helpful. And then right here, you can actually click this if you go on like the QR code. You can click that little link and it'll basically give you a starting point to see what's going to be high yield on the exam. That being said, once you kind of covered like the stuff that comes up the most, maybe that'll get you to like 70, 80th percentile. What's going to distinguish you from being kind of right there to getting, above the 70, 80s is going to be going for the lower yield stuff. So like the more smaller things that don't come up as often, but that do ultimately impact your score.
So for biochem, I think the most difficult passages are the passages that give you some kind of pathway or like there's a lot of jargon, like give you a lot of things you're not supposed to know beforehand. And I think the biggest thing you can do is to draw while you're reading the passage because they will ask you something about that pathway and going back and like trying to figure out in the passage what it relates to is too hard, and this is making it so much easier for you to like have the overview. This is actually one of the real drawings I did while I was taking like my practice exam. And that might not make sense to you, but the most important is that it made sense to me, and I could see that like this interacted with this and that led to that, which led to this, and that like gave like the negative feedback to the original this. And that like helps you really understand when the question asks, what happens when this thing is different? And you can like follow your chart and really know the answer instead of trying to go back to the um passage and try to see what that thing does. Um, and really understanding relationships is also important for biochem because a lot of the times the MCAT is not going to ask you the straightforward, like, what do you know questions. It's more like, what would happen differently if this thing was different? And you need to know that how that thing relates to all other things. And you also need to understand the purpose because the passages that you're given are not written for the MCAT specifically. They're excerpts from real research that is done, and it was done for reasons that are not to put it in the MCAT. And being able to understand why did the people decide to do this experiment? Why did they have these conditions would let you understand, um, let you answer a lot of questions because you can know why they did this and therefore what kind of answers that might lead to and what they're looking for from the answer. So data interpretation is very important for biochem and being able to read real research passages and understand why it was done and why certain controls were in place is something that's really common on the MCAT.
Yeah, I would agree with that. Also, like when you get into med school and like when you become a doctor, there's going to be a lot more research that comes out between now and then. And you're, as a physician and as a med student and everywhere in your training, you're going to have to know, what is actually going on in this research that's coming out. You should kind of be up to date, as best as you can with the newer literature. And so this is a skill that they kind of force you to develop as you're preparing for the MCAT, and then it actually becomes relevant later on in the field. And so just kind of put yourself in the mindset of like, okay, I'm doing this for my current self, right, to get the good score on the MCAT, but also like this is going to be relevant and helpful later on, in my career as a physician. So here's like Soch. This is like Pavlov and his dog, and so really it's like showing how like the dog is Pavloving Pavlov. Anyway, we like our memes.
So I think a lot of people kind of discount psych soc because they feel like it's easier or anything like that and kind of like put it off towards the end. So don't do that. Every point on the MCAT is worth the same amount of points towards your final score. So doing well on psych soc is just as important as doing well on any other section. So one thing I would do is you need to know every term mentioned in the content outline. So AAMC has this official content outline where they say everything you need to know for all the sections. And it's not that useful for science sections because it just says you need to know optics and you need to know optics. But on the psych soc specifically, it's very useful because it gives you like specific terms that will come up on the MCAT. And what I would do is you start like a document or notes where you have every term from the content outline, what it means, and the example. And I think that's a more active way to engage with it rather than reading someone else's notes. I think there's a lot of notes like going around online of psych like 300-page document, a 80-page document. So making your own document is a more active way to engage with those things. And I think one thing that gets you to like the final like 99th percentile of psych soc is to be able to understand and be able to interpret experimental design because this isn't this isn't just knowing the term, it's being able to look at the graphs and understand why they did the experiment and what the outcome is and be able to interpret that, as well as for psych soc is a bit different from biochem because the setups of the experiments are different. And you have to know like the cross-sectional study, longitudinal study, things like that, like what kind of research there is. And also, it's a bit different because there's like ethical considerations as well. Um, so being able to understand psych like specific data design and experiments is also helpful in order to get you to that last stretch.
Yeah, I would agree with that for sure. And also, like the going back to the knowing every term thing, you can do that with Anki. There's some pre-made Anki decks that I found pretty useful. I put them in the QR code again, and so for me, Miles Down was awesome. I just really learned a lot. But at the same time, you want to be making your own stuff as well. If it's maybe a term that you didn't see in the deck, or like it's something that you yourself specifically need help with and like it's just not clicking, make a flashcard on it, put it in your own document. That's like a really good way to actively engage with the material. But yeah, like reading for me at least, and Evelina it seems as well, just reading a document isn't really gonna do much. Like she mentioned the 300-page doc, the 100-page doc. It's helpful stuff for sure. But I would say that's more for the end when you've already kind of gotten the information and you kind of have it retained already. You can use it to basically check and say, okay, do I know this? Do I know this? Right? Just be aware of all the terms. But Miles Down, super helpful. Would highly recommend them. So test day, leading up to test day, right? So we've done all the things, we've prepared well, and big day. So this is some things to consider, when am I ready, right? And so you want to be looking at how do your last two practice exams compare to your goal score. So if you want, let's say 510, right, and you're at like 507, right? 508, and like your last two were like around there. I would say, yeah, you're doing pretty good. And so you'd be wanting to look at, are you within about 3 points away from your goal score when you're like 6 weeks away from exam day? This is all general. I mean, some people can have like big jumps, in a shorter time frame. But this is just kind of general advice that I've found to be pretty true. So be within, about 3 points within 6 weeks from test day. And then at the very bottom, these are just some things, some skills, right, that you should basically have when coming into test day. So before and on the day of your official exam. So the week before, these are the things that I did. And a lot of it is kind of for like anxiety purposes, for mindset purposes. So if you go to the test site the week before and you familiarize yourself with the location, when you go on test day, it's not going to feel as jarring. You're not going to be as shocked by everything because you've already been there, right? And so it's not going to be as scary. And then the night before, right, you want to set your clothes out, put your ID out, right, snacks, water, all that good stuff because the last thing you want is to be like morning of the test and you need to be there in 20 minutes and you can't find your ID, you don't have your water, you have nothing, and that will just jack your anxiety up through the roof. So just set it out the night before. Um, And so like the day of, you want to have a good breakfast, right? Nothing that'll make your stomach hurt, right? Like be aware of like what foods that you're able to eat. I personally just had like a really carb heavy breakfast to basically fuel my brain. And then I had a small coffee. I didn't want to have like the anxiety from like excess caffeine along with test anxiety, like, mix and then make it worse. So small coffee, some carbs, and then I got there super early. Lastly, I listened to the instrumental music playlist that I had been studying with the whole 9 months. So it's like that same playlist that kind of like got me in the mindset of getting ready to do MCAT questions for like 7 hours. So the MCAT, it's a marathon, right? It's not a sprint. You need to take care of yourself. This is a long process. It's not something that you can really just do in a couple weeks. Make sure you're exercising if you can. I personally started running. I found that super helpful, especially after a long study day. I would just go out to like the park and like go run like a couple miles. It was great. Um, Make sure that you're giving yourself breaks. You're not going to be able to have a perfect day every time. Like each day that you study, it's not going to be like you did every single thing that you wanted to. Some days you will, some days you won't, and you just have to kind of roll with it. Um, every medical student has taken this exam, so the medical students, like almost all of them probably have taken the exam, and so they did it. You can do it too. And then the kind of at the bottom, you can see step one, two, three. So that's how long that the step exams are, and those are exams that you take in medical school and like to become a doctor ultimately, right? And so you can see that they're very long, and they also take a lot of preparation. So all these skills that you build, right, like your stamina and your ability to analyze and all that, these are going to be skills that basically carry over. Um, and lastly, don't let the score impact your self-worth. Your MCAT score, right? It's not going to tell you how compassionate you are, how intelligent you are, your empathy, your ability to connect with patients. It doesn't dictate if you are going to be a good human being, a good doctor. Um, that being said, though, if you do score really well, like it goes the opposite way. So, it doesn't mean that you can't also be empathetic, compassionate, intelligent as well. So, um, you know, take that for what it is. Don't let it dictate how you see yourself. This is just a note on scoring. The scoring, like if you've never seen it, you're kind of confused about it, like 500 and then percentiles, like what's going on. So right here you have 500 is like the average. And so basically you can follow the chart, you go to, okay, score 500, percentile is 46, right? And so then this is from Princeton. Basically it says, did you get a percentile rank of 50? That means you scored higher or equal to 50% of other test takers. The higher the MCAT percentile, the better, right? And so then you can kind of follow it all the way down to like the top percentiles, right? 528. And basically tells you how you did compared to everyone else. The average medical student, right, MS1 is going to be about 5'11". I think this data is like, I don't know, like 2019, 2020. Could be a little bit newer, but this is going to hold pretty true. But just because it says average doesn't mean that you have to get this or you won't get in, right? Like I know people who have gotten in with lower scores. I know people who have gotten in with higher scores, obviously. And so, take that with a grain of salt, but, aim for the best score you can, obviously.
So this is my actual scores from when I attempted the MCAT, and I think it's just really important to not think that this is the only score you're able to get and you can improve. This test is really testing you how well you've prepared for this test and how much effort you've put in. So, and I was really struggling the first time, two times because I wasn't really studying intentionally for the MCAT. I was kind of studying the way I would study for the regular test at school. And I think the second time I also got like test anxiety, like the beginning chem phys, like had some math thing that I wasn't able to do and I was missed like all the points at the end because I was like spent like 10, 15 minutes on like that one math problem and wasn't able to move on and things like that. And I was late for cars. So it just kind of like got me all out of whack. So you can do better. Even if you've already taken it before, you can do things differently and take it again. If you have never taken the MCAT yet, I'm hoping that this is helpful for you to not make the same mistake as me and like take it when you're not ready. But I think the most important thing to know is that you can improve and it is possible if with the right amount of effort and the correct um like actually being self-aware of what you missed and why you didn't do as good last time and changing what you're doing. And that might look very different for everybody, which is why you kind of have to do the self-aware like assessment on what you did and what you should be doing. And that might not be something that other people can tell you because it's very personal.
Yeah, 100% agree. I mean, so this is similar to kind of how I started. My cars was about here. I think it was less. And so then each of the ones with the stars are like actual attempts of like my actual scores, and then the ones without the stars are like a practice exam, right? And so like I did one, and then I took it, and I was like, okay, 501. And I took like what is that, five, something like that, like in a row, and then I got all the way up to 512, right? Like you could see it down here, 512, and I was like, okay, great. Like I think I'm ready. Took it, got a 503. And I realized, like I said earlier, that it was test anxiety. And so took another practice test, 510, and decided, okay, I'm still ready for this exam. And then, I took the MCAT the third time and, I got it. And so this is all just to say, like, you can see that for the like four tests in a row, I barely moved anything. And then like my first two attempts, right, it's like it barely moved the needle. And so it can feel like you'll never get any better. And, you might have these feelings of like self-doubt and like, man, I'll never, improve. But you have to ignore those feelings and then you just have to keep going forward. Because, if you just keep at it, you will succeed. And that's going to conclude everything. I just want to say thank you for your time. Thanks for being here. It was really cool to talk to y'all about it and basically share, the advice that we learned. Before we open up to questions, I do just want to mention that the Stanford ODME, the programs that me and Evelina are both part of, together we created the MCAT Office Hour. And so basically we're offering free MCAT help. It's me, Evelina, and then a tutor, another tutor named Ardov. And we're going to have some more later on down the road. But basically, we're just going to walk through practice questions with y'all. We're going to do passage analysis. We're going to do question breakdowns. We'll go over like some really high yield topics. And overall, we want to build a supportive community to basically give back the resources that we wish we had. So yeah, that'll be in the QR code as well. And yeah, we hope to see you there. We'll open it up for questions now. And I just want to say thanks again for your time.
Yeah. So we have some questions that are in the Q&A. First is, from your experience, what would you say are the most effective study methods, especially for people who have other obligations? So I think some of the things we already gone over, but for me, it was really being accountable of how much I am studying, even if I'm working and doing other things. I think I should do t said before that I had like a tracker that I would start whenever I would study and stop it if I'm taking a break or not doing anything, and that gave me an accurate estimate that this week I studied this amount of hours. And it's okay for it to be lower or higher certain days or times, but I think being really objective of this is how much I studied helped me feel like I did the most I could, or I should have been better about certain things and things like that. I think it does help to have some other things outside of the MCAT because it kind of changes your mind on things. But also, I think so I was working in a research lab. I was mindful of also trying to think about things that are helpful for me at work for the MCAT. Like I was struggling with mental math, so at work, instead of like using my calculator, I would do all the math required for work in my head for like buffers and stuff. And then I would check it on the calculator. That way I was getting like some practice, even though I was not really doing the MCAT stuff.
Yeah, I mean, I had some obligations too. Like I said, I was working full time when I was first taking it. Effective study methods, I mean, there's a lot of different ways you can go about it. It's really going to be based on what works for you. I mean, I know it feels like a non-answer, but really, like, that is the case. If I had to give specific advice, I would say basically the calendar is going to be super helpful. Decide what you're going to try to accomplish, and then from there, you can kind of just check things off the list. And then also, like Evelina said, it is going to show you all the things that you have accomplished, and then it kind of gives you that momentum. You're like, okay, I've already sunk like this much time, this much effort into it. Like, what's a little more, right? Like, I can keep going, I can do this. So, really, yeah, just use a calendar, and just kind of knock it off like as much as you can, throughout your studies.
So the next question is, I'm trying to break 500. Any advice? People just tell me to do UWorld. So I think UWorld, I have some issues with UWorld. I know it's very popular. And one of the things is that it's not really representative of how real WMC questions are because they often require more steps. I think the MCAT questions are really designed so you only do like one minute. And usually, like, even if it's a formula, it's kind of like one math step. While the UWorld questions are kind of more elaborate than that often the time. So if you are doing UWorld, I would do it like untimed. Um, but I think if you are not being able to break 500, it's might be that your content and your study skills are the issue. And doing things like UWorld might be not helpful because UWorld often requires you to have the knowledge and also be able to do the critical thinking part. And if you're lacking the knowledge, you're not even having the opportunity to practice the critical thinking because you kind of have to know what the question is about in order to do the critical thinking part in order to answer the question. So I would really sit down and like think about how you're studying and whether that's something that's helpful to you because whatever you're doing right now leads you to missing the same content, the same questions again. And that means you have to go back to restudy those topics. And I think sometimes you have to try a lot of different things before you really get to the method that works for you. I think I used Anki and flashcards because that was very popular. And I realized for like specifically biochemical pathways, it was not helpful for me because it was kind of disjointed. And like I would remember this enzyme with this like substrate, but like not how it fits an overall like pathway. So instead, I decided when I realized that I was still not able to answer biochemistry pathway questions, I printed them out and like I cut them out and then I would like practice arranging them in the right order kind of thing. And that was more helpful for me than Anki. So like think about the way you're studying and try to change what you're doing until you get to the method that works for you.
Yeah, just to kind of reiterate that as well. Yeah, it often does if you're not breaking 500, and like I was there, right? Like I think I was like 490s ish at one point. But yeah, it's gonna be the content in a lot of cases. So, I would be looking at, okay, what are the things that come up the most? And then which of those things that come up the most am I getting wrong? Right. And so like, for example, amino acids, right? Like we said, if you get a lot of those wrong, like that's going to be the basis for a lot of questions. Sometimes it won't ask you like what is this amino acid, right? Like that's pretty rare to get, but they'll ask you like you change this amino acid to this one and then what would happen to the overall protein, right? And so maybe they're like this amino acid's polar, this one's non-polar, right? And so that would cause big problems. And so those are like some key concepts that you kind of have to integrate. But I would really be looking at like for something specific, right? Look at what you are getting incorrect, and then what of those things are showing up the most. And I think that should really help you bring your score up.
So the next question is what made y'all continue to retake the MCAT because your scores were not so bad? So for me, I took the MCAT the first time and then I applied to medical schools and I didn't get in. So I decided to take it again. And then the second time I got like almost the same score, but I knew I could score better because I put in so much more effort, which is what led me to take it the third time because I knew that it wasn't representative of what I could do.
Yeah, same for me. I mean, I basically had the same experience. My scores were lower than Evelina's, but again, like I still, it wasn't enough for medical school for me at least. Um, so yeah, pretty much I just decided that I need something better to get into medical school, and so I retook it.
So the next question is how early is too early to study for the MCAT? I'm still in my first year of undergraduate and I have yet to take certain classes like biochemistry, physiology, etc. So I think it's a bit early to like study for the MCAT, but there are things you can do while taking your prerequisites in order to set yourself up um to do well on the MCAT. One is like really be certain that you're doing your best in your classes because don't like study something just for the test and then forget it. Aim to like really understand the material that when you come back to it, it would be easier to relearn and like refresh it rather than like completely study it from scratch. Another thing you can do is like take very good notes and like make sure that you keep your notes. Um, for the MCAT in order and like have the not the notebook that you use but like maybe succinct version of like the things that you really need to know, and that might be something that you'd be thankful for once you actually reach the MCAT.
Sorry, I was helping put the links in for the chat. What was the question you were answering?
How is it too early to study for the MCAT if they're in the first year of undergrad?
Yeah, I would say yes. I wouldn't really start studying for the MCAT because you have to think about like how long the score lasts, right? And so a lot of schools they'll say like 3 or so years that they'll take, right? And so if you're in your first year, right, you're presumably going to take another 3 years to graduate, right? And then if let's say you take the MCAT, your score might be invalid by the time you go to apply. Also, you don't want to distract yourself from your GPA, right? You don't want to try to spread yourself too thin because if you're studying super hard for the MCAT, it might be hard to get like the base of like your foundation of knowledge, right? For like biochemistry, biology. And so I would, if I were you at this point right now, I would be focusing on just really understanding, like the foundations, and then that'll set you up for success later on. And so in a way, you are preparing, you're just doing it at an earlier time.
Yeah, we
Um,
actually have a workshop coming up that's going to talk about that. But I would just add that you are preparing for the MCAT from the first general chemistry class. So if you're just sitting through your classes and your GPA, you should probably aim for A's. You should have some concept of the classes. Second, learn how to study. Like learn what works for you because studying is an art as much of a as it's a science. And so learn how you learn because everybody learns differently. And so and so using different techniques and different theories. The other part of it too is you don't want to learn to the point where you just learn it. And some people do this, study the day before the exam and do well. That's a really bad way to do it because all of the stuffs are going to add up to each other. And so learn the stuff right the first time. Um, and get it down because I'm telling you this right now, you do not want to go back and learn physics or all that stuff. And then the other part of it too, if you learn material well enough, like you're good at it, then if you're at a community college or university, like go and work at the Mesa Center and tutor, and you make like 17, 18 bucks, 20 bucks an hour on campus between your classes. And so you're also repeating what you learn. And when you learn something, teaching somebody else requires that extra level of skills and understanding of that concept. So, and there's a thing in medicine, they call it you see one, you do one, and then you teach one. And that's pretty much the entire residency. probably the last 2 years of medical school and your residency is that after you're done with your first, when you're first year resident, you're teaching medical students, and as you go up, you're teaching people below you, and so that's an art by itself. And so if you learn, I don't know, organic chemistry, if you learn the 20, the reactions, like teaching other people will solidify it so you don't have to learn it when you're taking the MCAT. So yeah, so don't just think that, oh, I'm not going to worry about, I would worry about your grades first, but second, learn the material so you don't have to relearn.
Just to reiterate what Jubin just said right now, I think that's so important to be able to teach it. That's actually my favorite method of studying and learning because it helps me find the gaps in my own knowledge, right? If I can't tell you how something works, if I can't explain it to you, then that means I don't know it, right? And so if you can't basically bring it from this really high level to a lower level where basically anyone could understand it, you might not know it as well as you think you do. And so I found that to be really helpful as teaching others. I think it's called the Feynman technique. But yeah, super, super good stuff.
Yeah, the next question is, does taking the MCAT multiple times harm med school admissions? I mean, I'm not an admissions officer, so I don't know, but you do want to aim to take the MCAT once, because it's expensive, it takes time, and it's a pain. You don't want to take it multiple times. Like, do not take it if you know you're not ready. It happens, and people who take the MCAT multiple times do get into medical school, and like you can like still become a doctor even if you did take you multiple times, but it's helpful not to have to take it multiple times. I'm not sure if that answers the question.
Well, I
Yeah.
could tell you that there's the max you could ever take in a lifetime is seven.
Yep.
So, and don't take your first MCAT as a funsies practice one. And I know there's a lot of people that have done that,
Yeah.
but people say if you take it more than three times, um, and then the other part of it too is don't be one of those people that is taking it for a better exam because let's say you take it the first time and you get, I don't know, a 516. And then you're like, oh, I really want a 520, and you take it again, you get a 508. You really like, what does it say? Screwed the pooch or whatever. I
I
Put
can't.
think
yourself in the
that sounds
food.
right.
What is it called?
Yeah, I think that's the saying. Yeah.
Screw the pooch or whatever.
Yeah.
So yeah, don't be one of those people that I don't know, you need to prove to yourself or other people. And so take it once, but yeah, taking it multiple times. And medical schools, just like herpes, can see all of your MCAT scores. So don't think that, oh, I'm going to show them my best one. They're going to see every single one of your MCAT
Mhm.
scores.
Yep.
So that it's not like a, and they also see all your grades too. But the most important thing is that they will see every single one of your scores and how many times you've taken it. So, but the whole point of this, if you're here today, you're hopefully you've never taken the MCAT before and you're gonna study right and so you only have to take it once, but it's not something you could take indefinitely.
Yeah, and then some schools also will average your MCAT score, and so that's a case by case basis, but just something to be aware of. So, like Jubin said, don't take it for funsies. Like, make sure you prepare well, and hopefully you utilize some of the advice we gave today. But yeah, hoping that you don't have to do that like we did.
Yeah, the next question
What do they
is,
say? Do is what I say, don't do is what I do type of
Yeah,
thing.
yep, yep.
yeah, the next question is, take practice exam week or 2 weeks, but what happens if you haven't reviewed what you missed from previous practice exam? So I think you have to personalize your studying to yourself. If you really feel like you did not significantly improve your knowledge from the previous practice exam, then you don't have to take another one because it's kind of not useful practice since you haven't improved. So do wait longer, and it's like up to you. You don't have to like completely master everything and 100% like the previous exam. I would say like if you cover like 80% of the things that you said you'd do after the previous one, do take the next one because if you're going to be too perfectionist about it, you might never like reach the point where you feel like you know everything. Um, and it is useful because the exams are slightly different. There's so much content that not every exam is going to have every single topic. Like on one exam, you might have like an electrochemistry like whole passage, and then the next exam you might not see that at all, and it be like a whole passage on fluid dynamics. So like don't wait too long between the tests, especially because you also need to see like whether you're improving and like test yourself in order to know that your studying is working. But don't like take it every week just because like it's on your schedule to you have to take it every week. If you're not ready, and you need more time, do that too.
Yeah, the most of the point of taking the full length is to actually review it. That's where most of the actual like learning comes from. When you take the exam itself, the full length exam, you do get better at the stamina, right? But if you just take it to take it, it's like, well, what did you gain from it, right? Like the review is where you make most of your progress, in my opinion. And so I would highly recommend just getting as much of it done. But like Evelina said, right, if you're like 80, 90% done, don't like put your whole exam, off like a week or so, right? Just kind of get it done and move forward.
Yeah, and I could just tell you this, the MCAT is not a test of how much knowledge and information and how smart you are. It's how you take the damn exam. So don't get in this whole vortex of content review because you could literally spend your whole time trying to learn the concept. And if you don't know how, if and not taking the and not being able to take the test and how you take the test, then you're going to be in a world of trouble. I know somebody who had a PhD in physics or chemistry, one of them, but they did really bad in that section
Yeah.
because they knew the concept really well, but didn't like practice exam for those sections. And they did, I think their best was the cars. So yeah, so don't get in this whole, thing of like you need to know the concept, like, and they don't, and to be honest with you, they don't really care on if you know the concept is how you do the exam.
Just it kind of goes to show, right? It's like it's not just the content, it's the skills to actually take the exam, right? Like the PhD example, the person probably knows way more than me or Evelina do, right, about the topic, but it's about the skill and how you synthesize the information from the passage and pull out what's MCAT relevant. So, right, like Jubin said, it's how you take the exam is going to be the majority of your score.
And it sucks. It's a terrible test. It's a gatekeeper, but what do they say? If you want to dance, you got to get in the arena. So and so if you it's one of those steps that you have to do. And the other part of it too is, why does it suck? Or, it's because you're going to be taking exams your entire life. And so part of the part of this whole process is you learn how to take tests because once you get to medical school, you got to take the boards, and then the third time you take the board, you're working 100 hours a week, and you don't really have a lot of time to study for that. So it's a conditioning exercise more than anything. I think there's a couple more questions. Um, Somebody asked, should I study for the MCAT around 300 hours to do well? Um, I think Evelina answered. Do you want to answer that? And Bradley, do you want to add to that?
Yeah, I don't like hours. Like I don't even I couldn't tell you how many hours I spent, right? It's like what do you do with the hours, right? Like I could spend 1 hour on one question and like okay, I did an hour, but okay, I learned one thing right from the question. So it's not the hours in my opinion, it's what are you gaining from it? And so really I'd be looking at, maybe questions if I had to do something with like numbers, but really it's just trying to refine and see, how can I improve, right? And so just kind of keep moving forward that way. But yeah, I wouldn't say there's like an hours thing. I don't know about you, Evelina.
Yeah, I think it's like a personal thing. Like you might have spent a lot of hours, but you did the same thing over and over again without improving, and you're not like changing the way you're studying, and you're just like doing like the pointless like reading of the chapter over and over again, and it might not be helpful. So I think you just have to really always be adjusting what you're doing and be self-aware about where you're at and like how you would do if you were to take the real MCAT on this practice exam. Um, and you have to be self-aware of that to really know whether you're ready. Like there's no like benchmark of hours. Like for some people it takes 2 months to study, while for other people it takes a year to study, depending on you and what happened and what you did, and whether it's been last year when you took your last prerequisite or whether you've been out of school for 10 years, you know.
Yeah, I would just say nobody's going to give you a cookie for studying 100 hours and getting a 525 or 528, and nobody's going to give you a cookie for getting, studying 2000 hours and then doing bad. So you have to know what is good for you and how you learn and um how you study, and that's very different for other people. You may you may be able to get away with, doing less because you are, so for every person is different. And, and the other part of it too, um, some of us that English is not our first language, you're gonna like have to do other things, as well to be able to, and so there's that aspect of it too. So there's a lot of things that go into it. So I would just say study enough hours that you know that you're going to do well.
Yep. Yep. Just take it when you're ready. Take it when your scores, your practice scores are close to what you want on the actual exam, and then I would say go from there. But yeah, it's not about the hours. Did
All right.
we?
Anything else? Anybody else? Any other questions? Any other questions you guys want to answer? You want to go over, Evelina?
Yeah, if there's any we didn't answer yet, I'm okay to answer.
It was about the prereqs. So this is also another one too. Like some people say, "Oh, I know someone who took the MCAT and didn't take biochem and they did really well, or didn't take OChem and they great." Those people are, the outliers, and so take the prereqs. Like, there's no like no again, nobody's going to give you, if you can, nobody's going to stop you from taking the exam, but it's up to you. Do you want to learn the material on your own, or do you want to take, obviously you're going to have to take OChem and other stuff. And some medical schools require you to take biochem. So,
Yeah.
do you want to suffer first or do you want to suffer later? I
Yeah.
mean, it's just one of those things that,
Yeah.
yes, and you're going to read someone on Reddit, which or SD,
Mm.
or some board that, oh, my friend took the MCAT without taking biochem and OChem and they scored a 528. Great, that person, but again, they may be the outlier. And the other part of it too, if you're reading it on Reddit or whatever, I question, you know,
Yeah, I
I
think that do you want to suffer an hour later is really hitting the nail on the head, right? It's like you have to learn it at one point. Do you want to learn it now or later? And then also, right, putting that in line with the medical school admissions requirements because some schools will require those classes and some don't. So yeah, just things to be aware of.
yeah, I don't have any other questions in there or anything else, and I gotta go to bed. So
All right. Well, thank you for this. This was a really fun time, and I appreciate